I knew something was off the second I saw the neon orange construction stakes hammered into the frost-bitten soil near my cabin. They weren't there yesterday. I'd just come up for the weekend, hoping to hike, chop some wood, and enjoy the quiet. Instead, I found plastic flags marking a line straight across my access road like someone was claiming a slice of my mountain. And then came the voice, that shrill, commanding tone that could peel paint off a wall. "You can't be here without HOA approval, sir." I turned around. There she was. A bleach blonde woman in her 50s wearing a parka that probably cost more than my ATV, standing with her arms crossed, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was a holy relic. Karrenna Stovall, HOA president of the Whispering Pines development, an overbuilt suburban nightmare of luxury homes half a mile down the ridge. I'd seen her once at the town hall meeting last year, arguing that non-HOA residents should still follow community standards. I'd laughed. She hadn't. "This cabin is on restricted HOA-regulated land," she said, stepping over the property marker like it wasn't even there. "We've voted to erect a privacy fence. You'll need to relocate this structure within 30 days. I blinked. "You're putting a fence where?" She gestured to the stakes. "The new HOA boundary. The board voted unanimously. We're reclaiming this ridge for community use. You're technically squatting." I nearly laughed. "Karrenna, I've owned this ridge for over 20 years. She gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Not according to our new survey." That's when I noticed the truck parked behind a tree. A guy with a laser measurer stood beside it. Looked like they'd brought their own surveyor, probably some buddy of the board. "You brought someone to fake a boundary line?" I asked. Karrenna stepped closer, her perfume hitting me like a chemical spill. "It's not fake if it's been approved by the HOA. We have bylaws, Mr. Jalen Prescott." I stared her down. "And I don't fall under your HOA." She blinked like I'd spoken in Latin. "Whispering Pines bylaws state, Whispering Pines ends a quarter-mile downhill. My deed says I own from the Southern Creek bed to the Northern Ridge Pass. That includes this cabin and the 200 acres surrounding it." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, we'll see about that. You'll be hearing from our legal team." I let her storm off, stomping through snow like it owed her money, but I wasn't about to let this slide. She'd crossed onto my land, tampered with property markers, and tried to pull some HOA power grab on terrain she didn't even control. I spent the next hour pulling up the stakes, dropping them in a neat pile beside the split-rail gate. Then I opened the safe in my cabin, pulled out the full property deed signed, sealed, and registered with the county clerk, and called my friend Declan, who happened to be a land use attorney. "Let me guess," he said when I explained. "HOA Karen's trying to conquer the mountain now? She just tried to fence off my driveway." "Well then," Declan said, "she just committed about 3 crimes. It was game on." By the next morning, a thin sheet of snow blanketed the ridge, but the tire tracks from Karrenna's SUV were still visible, cutting across what she'd apparently decided was her land. I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sun stretch over the treetops, and considered my next move. I wasn't going to play defense, not with someone like her. As I stepped back inside, my phone buzzed. Declan had sent over the initial steps for filing a formal cease and desist. He'd also flagged something more interesting: a zoning change request filed 2 weeks ago by Whispering Pines Development Corporation. That wasn't just a paper shuffle, it was a strategic land grab. I grabbed my keys and headed into town. The county recorder's office was tucked behind the courthouse, its lobby quiet aside from the hum of fluorescent lights. The clerk, Marcy, had known me since I was in high school. "You're looking for the zoning applications?" she asked, already pulling a file from the cabinet without me needing to explain. "Anything related to Whispering Pines or their HOA board?" I said. She handed over a manila folder thick enough to warrant a second glance. "They've been busy." Inside, I found a dozen requests, road expansions, utility easements, and there it was, an application to redraw the boundary of their HOA jurisdiction. The justification: Unclaimed ridge land suitable for community integration and recreational development. Unclaimed. That was bold. I flipped to the survey maps they'd submitted. The new lines didn't just cut through my land, they ignored existing county markers entirely. Worse, the surveyor who signed off on it wasn't licensed in this state. I snapped a photo of the signature and address. "Mind if I keep a copy of this one?" I asked. Marcy gave a knowing nod. "Make as many as you want. If they're trying to rewrite the mountain, they're gonna have a fight on their hands." Out in the parking lot, I made 2 calls. First to Declan, who started drafting a formal complaint to the State Surveyor Board. Then to Deputy Clayton, who'd spent the last 15 years patrolling these hills and knew land disputes better than most lawyers. "Prescott," Clayton said as he answered. "Heard Whispering Pines is stirring dust again. What's she done now?" "Filed a fraudulent map to seize part of my land. Tried to install boundary stakes on my private road, too." There was a pause. "You got proof?" "I've got the forged survey, photos of the fake stakes, and a license check on the guy who signed it. He's from 3 states over and not even registered here." "That's criminal misrepresentation," Clayton said. "You free this afternoon, always. Meet me at the ridge." "I'll bring the sheriff." When I got back, I found new tracks, this time from a flatbed trailer that had dropped off a pallet of fencing materials right at the base of my drive. Someone wasn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. I left it untouched and waited. By 2 o'clock, Sheriff Mallory and Deputy Clayton stood next to me, both of them staring at the pallet like it had personally insulted them. "They delivered this without your consent?" Mallory asked. "There's no permit, no authorization, and it's sitting on private property," I said. "They're escalating." Clayton walked around the stack, taking photos. "We can start with criminal trespass and illegal dumping. I've also got records showing they submitted a zoning change with a forged surveyor," I added. Mallory raised his eyebrows. "That'll get state investigators involved." "You want to see the documents?" Mallory nodded, so I handed over the folder. He flipped through it slowly, his jaw tightening with each page. "This is deliberate," he said. "She knows this isn't her land. That means intent. You're looking at conspiracy to defraud and tampering with public records." "Can we press charges?" "I'll take this to the DA," Mallory said. "We'll open a formal investigation. In the meantime, I'll issue a stop work order on anything they try to build near your boundary." "That'll slow her down," Clayton added, "but it won't stop her unless we make it public." "I've got a plan for that too," I said. The next day, I rented a drone and flew it over the entire ridge, documenting the cabin, my drive, and every boundary marker that had stood since my grandfather's time. Then I edited the footage to include side-by-side comparisons with the county's official satellite images, and added a voiceover explaining what Whispering Pines was trying to do. By sundown, the video was live on the town's community board, captioned, "HOA tries to steal Mountain Ridge, gets caught." Within 24 hours, it had over 30,000 views. That evening, I heard tires crunch on gravel again, only this time it wasn't Karrenna. It was a black SUV with tinted windows and a license plate from the city. A man in a tailored coat stepped out mid-40s, polished and clearly not used to dirt roads. "Jalen Prescott?" he asked, approaching with a business card. I took it. "Evan Marks, external counsel for Whispering Pines Holdings." I folded my arms. "They've upgraded from clipboards to lawyers now," he gave a practiced chuckle. "I'm here as a courtesy. The board would like to resolve this amicably. Then they can start by removing every inch of fencing material they dumped on my land." Marks held up his hands. "Look, I'm not here to argue property lines. I'm here because your video has attracted attention. Investors are spooked. The HOA is facing scrutiny. My clients want a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Marks pulled out a folder. "They're offering a cash package in exchange for a long-term land use agreement, no transfer of ownership. Just shared access to the ridge for community trails and scenic viewing. They want to lease part of my mountain. Think of it as cooperative development. You keep ownership, they get access. Everyone wins, I laughed. Except the part where they faked a survey and tried to fence me off my own land. Marx's smile faded. Look, I'm trying to keep this from becoming a full legal war. Too late, I handed the card back. Tell Karrenna this, if she sets foot on my land again, I'll have her arrested. If she sends another contractor up here, I'll sue the HOA and every board member individually. And if she thinks money will shut me up, she doesn't know who she's dealing with. Marx adjusted his tie. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No. She did. I watched him drive off, tires spinning slightly on the icy gravel. That night, I got an email from Declan. The State Surveyor Board had confirmed the signature on the Whispering Pines application belonged to a man who lost his license 5 years ago for falsifying documents in another state. Charges were being referred to the Attorney General. By morning, local news had picked up the story. And Karrenna, she wasn't answering her door, but that was fine, because tomorrow the sheriff was bringing a warrant. The morning after Evan Marks had driven off, a low-hanging fog clung to the treetops, casting the ridge in a ghostly hue. I stood on the porch of my cabin, coffee in one hand, binoculars in the other, tracking the unmistakable glint of reflective vests winding up the trail below. 2 figures, one carrying a clipboard, the other holding a camera, were pausing to take photos near the old logging trail that bordered the eastern slope. They weren't hikers. I jotted the time down in my notebook and tucked it into my coat. Then I grabbed the trail cam memory cards I'd pulled earlier that morning and headed for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mallory and I had agreed to keep communications tight. Since the state had opened an investigation into the forged survey, things had escalated quietly behind the scenes. What had started as a shady land grab was now looking more like a coordinated fraud operation. And the new faces showing up on the ridge weren't random, they were part of it. Inside the sheriff's office, Mallory was already reviewing documents with a woman I hadn't met before. She stood as I entered. Jalen Prescott, Mallory said, motioning to her. This is Agent Livia Herrera. She's with the State Land Integrity Task Force. Her handshake was firm. We've been following your case since the county clerk flagged the zoning application. You've stirred up quite the nest. I handed over the trail cam cards. Caught 2 more of them scoping out the eastern edge an hour ago. They weren't just sightseeing. Herrera slid the cards into her tablet and began flipping through the images. Her expression tightened. These 2 work for Ridgeline Development Holdings. They were named in a separate complaint last year involving illegal surveying practices in the next county over. Mallory leaned back in his chair. Karrenna's not just trying to expand her HOA. She's working with a private developer. Herrera nodded. And based on what we've found, this isn't isolated. Whispering Pines submitted similar zoning requests in 3 other rural communities over the last 18 months. Same language, same forged maps. Same push for community integration. So what's the angle? I asked. They use the HOA as a front, Herrera said. Claim adjacent land is common use or unclaimed, push fraudulent surveys through sleepy county offices, then hand development rights to Ridgeline. They sell it as a green space initiative. But within a year, there's a clubhouse, vacation rentals, and half a dozen community improvement fees. Mallory looked at me. You said no to the settlement offer. That probably threw a wrench in their timeline. Herrera pulled out a folder. We've already issued subpoenas for Whispering Pines Board communications and financial records, but we need more. Something that ties Karrenna directly to Ridgeline. I crossed my arms. Then you'll want to talk to Declan. He just forwarded me a copy of a shared mailbox between Karrenna and a Ridgeline executive. They were discussing easement language 2 weeks before the zoning request was filed. Herrera's eyes lit up. Can he authenticate it? He's already working on it. She snapped the folder shut. Then it's time we pay the HOA a visit. 3 hours later, I watched from my truck as 2 unmarked state vehicles rolled into Whispering Pines. The neighborhood looked like a movie set: identical homes, trimmed hedges, and not a single car parked on the street. But behind the sterile charm, there was panic. Residents stood on porches, phones in hand, whispering as Karrenna and her team entered the HOA clubhouse. It didn't take long. Within 20 minutes, they escorted out the Whispering Pines board treasurer, a stiff man in a blue windbreaker who looked like he hadn't expected to be handcuffed before lunch. I spotted Karrenna standing near the ornamental fountain, arms folded, mouth tight. She didn't shout, didn't protest. Just watched. Mallory approached her with a warrant in hand and spoke calmly. She didn't move at first. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back toward the clubhouse. "She's not going to run?" I asked as Karrenna slid back into the passenger seat of her SUV. "She's not the type to flee," Karrenna said. "She's the type to lawyer up and throw everyone else under the bus. And what happens now? We freeze everything. Any construction plans, land acquisitions, HOA expenditures, they're all under review. If the evidence holds, we're looking at wire fraud, conspiracy, and possibly racketeering." I exhaled slowly. "That's bigger than I expected," Karrenna nodded. "They were counting on people not asking questions. You changed that." That night, I returned to the cabin and lit the wood stove. Winds rolled down the ridge, rattling the windows, but the place felt heavier somehow, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. I didn't sleep much. By morning, word had spread. A group of Whispering Pines residents showed up at my gate, half a dozen of them, bundled in jackets, holding thermoses and clipboards of their own. The man in front, a retired mechanic named Russ I'd seen around town, raised a hand. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said. We didn't know what was going on." I opened the gate. "Come on up. Fire's going." Inside, the group sat around the hearth while I poured coffee. They weren't angry, mostly embarrassed. They'd been sold a dream of cooperative living and community control. They hadn't realized the board was running a shadow deal to flip land for profit. "We found out last night that our dues were being funneled into something called strategic reserve funds," a woman named Denise said. "But there's no mention of that in the budget statements. They were using HOA money to finance land grabs," Russ added, "and we think some of us were listed as approval votes on documents we never even saw." "You have those documents?" I asked. He nodded and pulled out a USB drive. "We downloaded every board meeting recording we could find. Half of them don't match the published minutes." I took the drive, my brain already spinning. "If what you're saying is true, they committed proxy fraud and falsified meeting reports." Denise leaned forward. "We want to help. We want them gone, legally, permanently. Can you connect us with your lawyer?" I nodded. "You're not the only ones they tried to silence. Let's make sure they don't get the chance again." Over the next week, the HOA board began to crumble. 2 more members resigned under scrutiny. One tried to claim ignorance, but was promptly contradicted by a recorded Zoom call where he'd openly discussed fast-tracking community trail permits to improve optics. Karrenna's team uncovered shell companies linked to Ridgeline that were used to funnel bribes, small ones, but enough to implicate multiple contractors and 2 county zoning officials. One of them quietly flipped and provided internal emails showing that Karrenna had been promised a consulting position with Ridgeline once the integration project was complete. Declan filed a civil suit on behalf of a growing coalition of residents and independent landowners. It wasn't just about my ridge anymore. The case was now a statewide example of HOA corruption, and it was gathering momentum. Still, I kept my focus close. The ridge was quiet again. No strange trucks, no surveyors, no more shadowy visitors. One afternoon, as I cleared brush near the edge of my northern trail, I spotted a familiar figure walking up the path. It was Denise, holding a sealed envelope. She handed it to me. The community voted, 92% in favor of dissolving the current HOA structure. "We're forming a new association, transparent, volunteer-run, and no jurisdiction outside our actual lots." I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten and signed by dozens of residents. "You started this," she said. So we thought you should be the first to know. I looked down at the signature block and saw my name listed under Advisor Non-Member Observer. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of relief. The mountain was mine again, and this time it wasn't just me guarding it. The mountain air had turned sharper by early spring, the last patches of snow melting into the roots of pine and fir. I was on my hands and knees in the gravel, repairing the lower culvert near the bend when an unfamiliar sedan rolled up and stopped short of the gate. A tall man stepped out in a navy raincoat, holding a leather satchel close to his side. His shoes were wrong for the terrain, polished, narrow, the kind that sunk into soft mud. He held up a badge. Special Agent Neary, Department of Justice. I believe you're Jalen Prescott. I nodded once and stood, brushing grit from my palms. Didn't expect DC suits this far up the ridge. There's a reason we're here, he said, glancing toward the tree line. Mind if we talk inside? I led him back to the cabin. Once we were seated, Agent Neary opened his satchel and produced a thick folder. No small talk, no polite buildup. We've connected your case to a federal investigation involving wire fraud, unlawful land acquisition, and fraudulent municipal filings across multiple counties, he said. Whispering Pines wasn't acting alone. Karrenna Stovall and her associates orchestrated a scheme that spans 5 states. I leaned forward. How far up does it go? He laid a document on the table and tapped the name near the bottom. William Darrow, CEO of Ridgeline Development Holdings. The signature matched the one from the zoning application I'd seen weeks ago. Neary continued. We've uncovered emails indicating Karrenna acted as a regional point of contact, forwarding manipulated survey data to local HOAs and pushing for annexation votes under fabricated pretenses. In return, she received quarterly payments disguised as consulting fees wired through a non-profit shell organization operating out of Delaware. Why Delaware? Easier to hide ownership, but that's not the worst of it. He flipped to a second page showing a satellite image. This is a parcel in Nevada that Ridgeline tried to claim last year. Same tactics. Different HOA. But this time they forced out homeowners by cutting off utilities and using falsified code violations to bankrupt residents. I gritted my teeth. And no one stopped them. Until now, it was local jurisdiction. They kept it fragmented. But thanks to your recordings, the deed records, and that mailbox Declan found, we had enough to justify a federal task force. I stared at the folder for a long moment. So what happens to them? Stovall's been indicted on 6 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying public documents. Ridgeline's CEO and 2 senior officers are being picked up today. And the county clerk who signed off on the altered zoning map has agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Relief didn't quite cover it. It felt like the end of a long pressure build, like the mountain itself had been waiting for this. Then Neary handed me a letter. This is from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They'd like you to testify at the federal hearing next month. Your cabin's been listed as the origin point of the investigation, your key to the timeline. I opened it and scanned the letter. Formal, precise, and absolutely clear, I set it down carefully. I'll be there, Neary stood. We'll coordinate with your lawyer. You've done more than just protect your land, Mr. Prescott. You exposed a national scheme. As he left, I walked him to the gate. The wind had picked up again, carrying the scent of wet pine and fresh soil. He paused before stepping back into his car. Mountain's beautiful, he said. Hope it stays that way. It will, I said, now that it's clean. 2 weeks later, the federal indictment went public. I didn't need to see the news, I heard it from the courthouse steps when I walked into the hearing. The media swarmed the building, cameras flashing, reporters jostling for quotes. I kept my head down, focused on the testimony ahead. Inside the courtroom, Karrenna sat at the defense table, her once coiffed hair pulled tight in a low bun. The confidence she'd worn like perfume was gone. Her eyes darted across paperwork, avoiding mine entirely. Declan sat beside me, eyes scanning the room. They're folding, he whispered. Her lawyer's trying to cut a deal. She'll plead out if they drop the conspiracy charge. She doesn't deserve a deal. She won't get a walk, trust me. When it was my turn, I took the stand. The judge asked for clarity, not drama, so I gave it to him, straight facts when the stakes showed up. When Karrenna trespassed, the fraudulent maps, the zoning application, the delivery of fencing materials, the fake surveyor, the surveillance footage, the community votes. Every step documented and presented, the prosecutor didn't need to embellish. The evidence was overwhelming. When I stepped down, I passed Karrenna's table. She looked up for just a second. Her expression was hollow, not angry, not defiant, just empty. That was enough for me. The verdict came 3 days later, guilty on 5 counts. Her sentence would be determined in the coming months, but she wouldn't be returning to Whispering Pines. That much was guaranteed. Back up on the ridge, life resumed without the static. I rebuilt the old tool shed near the ravine, cleared the last of the debris from the winter storms, and began repairing the upper trail. A few neighbors from the community stopped by from time to time, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. Russ brought over a set of hand-carved trail markers. Denise helped organize a volunteer cleanup along the creek bed. The new volunteer-run association was thriving. They'd rewritten the bylaws from scratch, removed all expansion clauses, and added a transparency mandate requiring recorded meetings and full public access to all decisions. No more hidden surveys. No more backroom deals. Late one afternoon, as I stacked firewood near the porch, a Jeep pulled up slowly to the gate. A woman stepped out mid-30s, jeans and a flannel-worn hiking boots. She carried a folded map and a smile that didn't try too hard. "Hi," she said, lifting the map. "I'm with the Forestry Service. We're reviewing old trail systems for possible restoration grants. Saw the drone footage you posted months ago, that ridge trail you re-cleared. It's on one of our legacy maps." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know anyone still had those," she nodded. "They're rare, but thorough. Would you be open to marking it as a public heritage trail? You'd retain ownership, just a designation that helps preserve it." I stepped down from the porch and took the map. There it was, faint, but unmistakable. A dotted line curving along the ridge, drawn decades before Whispering Pines had ever existed. "I think that'd be just fine," I said. She smiled. "Great, we'll send the paperwork." As she drove off, I looked out across the valley. Everything below was quiet, not silent, alive. Birds called from the trees. Wind stirred the leaves. And for the first time in a long while, there wasn't a single sign of intrusion. The ridge was mine again, not just by deed, not just by law, but by right. Not because I fought for it, but because I refused to surrender it.